Top 8 Terrifying Serial Killers. The names of Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Aileen Wuornos the Zodiac, and Richard Ramirez will always come to mind whenever the subject of serial killers is mentioned. Despite the sinister and twisted crimes, they have become household names and continue to instill fear in people's minds even today. Yet there are serial killers whose crimes are equally as chilling, but these stories are rarely told. These terrifying serial killers you might not have heard of, but you will never forget. Number 8. John Norman Collins. John Norman Collins, known also as the original co-ed killer, was suspected of murdering 8 victims. In 1967, the lifeless body of a co-ed was found on campus and she had suffered 20 stab wounds. 1 year later, another co-ed's body was found and she had suffered 47 wounds. It was discovered the student was last seen with fellow student John Norman Collins, but with insufficient evidence against him, he was let go. Over the next 2 years, the bodies of 6 more co-eds were found. Like history repeating itself, when police investigated the murder of the most recent victim, they were told she had also last been seen alive whilst walking with Collins. He was once again released for lack of evidence. Then there was a breakthrough, as bloodstains that matched with the victim were found in the basement of a house where Collins had been lodging. It was enough evidence to charge him murder. Collins appeared on the surface as a clean-cut all-American boy, yet he was a sinister killer who was obsessed with violent sex and bondage. In 1970, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Number 7. Patrick the Psychopath McKay. British serial killer Patrick McKay is also known as the Psychopath, for reasons that require no obvious explanation. Aged 13, he was institutionalized for trying to set fire to a church and sent to a secure institution for mentally ill young offenders. Despite McKay's violent outbursts, he was eventually discharged as his superficial charm allowed him to work the system in his favor. It was this system that failed to protect society as he began to develop as a serial killer. It is believed he killed 11 victims between February 1974 to March 1975. McKay himself recalled how he hacked at the skull of a priest at his home and watched him bleed to death. On another occasion, he stabbed an elderly woman to death during a robbery and drowned a helpless tramp in the River Thames. 2 psychiatrists confirmed that McKay was suffering from a severe personality disorder and that he was effectively a psychopath. His trial only lasted 20 minutes as he pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder and received 3 consecutive life sentences. Number 6. Robert the Butcher Baker Hansen. Robert Hansen was a cruel monster who hunted his female victims for sport in the Alaskan wilderness. Between 1971 and 1983, he started targeting sex workers for his own twisted pleasure. His victims were abducted, taken to his remote cabin and tortured. They were then set loose so he could hunt them down like wild animals with a Ruger Mini 14 and a hunting knife. He was finally caught when 17-year-old Cindy Paulson managed to flee whilst still wearing handcuffs and recounted her terrifying ordeal to the police. Hansen denied these claims and told the police he was being extorted for money. They let him go. Following an increasingly high number of women reported missing in the area, Hansen had become a person of interest. The police discovered items belonging to the victims at his cabin and eventually pieced together his sinister crimes. The victim count is believed to be as high as 21. Hansen was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole and died behind bars in 2014. Number 5. Helen Patricia Moore. In 1980, Helen Patricia Moore was charged with the murder of 3 children and the attempted murder of 2 others whilst she was babysitting. The Sydney-born serial killer said that she first murdered at the age of 16 following the death of her 14-month-old brother who she lost to SIDS. Her first victim was her 16-month-old baby cousin who she suffocated as she laid sleeping in her cot. She later revealed it was jealousy that motivated her because her baby cousin was alive and her brother was not. The following year, she attempted to suffocate a 12-month-old boy she was babysitting but he survived. Months later, she also attempted to suffocate another 2-year-old boy who was left blinded and permanently brain damaged.
I went to college for a while.
Within weeks of each other, she killed another baby girl and a 2-year-old boy, again suffocating the innocent children. Following the death of the toddler, Suzanne was arrested and she finally confessed to the string of horrific child murders. Her crimes are still heartbreaking to read about today. Number 4. Gary Hyde. Former FBI agent John Douglas, or aka Mindhunter, revealed Gary Hyde is one of the most frightening serial killers he had ever interviewed. Hyde suffered from schizoid personality disorder and had spent the majority of his life in and out of psychiatric hospitals. Between November 1986 and March 1987, he abducted 6 women and killed 2 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Douglas revealed, Hyde was even worse than the guy Buffalo Bill in the movie Silence of the Lambs. He would fill the pit up with water and not drown his victims, but have them stand in water up to their necks and then get electric wire and torture them while they were in the water. What made it even worse was after he killed them, he then would put the victims in a meat grinder and fed them to the other victims. Hyde was finally caught when one of his victims managed to luckily escape with her life. He was executed by lethal injection in 1999. Number 3. Amelia Dyer. Although she is considered one of the most prolific murderers in British history, Victorian serial killer Amelia Dyer, or aka the Ogress of Reading, appears to have been forgotten over time. She was a sinister, baby farmer responsible for the deaths of hundreds of infants. Dyer promised to help young women pregnant out of wedlock by finding them adoptive homes for the babies. After she charged him a fee, the newborns would then either be starved or suffocated to death. In 1896, a lifeless baby was discovered wrapped in parcel paper with her address. When police raided her house, they were overwhelmed by the stench of rotting flesh and the bodies of more than 50 infants were uncovered. It's likely she killed between 200 to 400 children. Dyer tried to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, but in less than 5 minutes a jury reached the guilty verdict. Aged 60 years old, she was hanged at Newgate Prison in London. Number 2. Harrison Cookie Monster Graham. In 1987, Harrison Graham's apartment in Philadelphia was raided by police and they found the remains of 7 women. Graham told the police the bodies had been there when he first moved in, then later confessed to accidentally strangling them all during sex whilst he was under the influence of drugs. Graham had a Cookie Monster toy that he would sleep with, and his defense claimed he had 3 personalities: Frank, a drug addict and murderer; Junior, a 2-year-old who could not be without the Cookie Monster; and Marty, a likable handyman who was compliant with the police. His defense that he suffered from multiple personality disorder was rejected by a judge, and he was convicted of all 7 murders and 7 charges of desecrating a corpse. Due to his low IQ and mental illness suffered during his early years, he managed to skip the death penalty, and behind bars, he became an ordained minister. Number 1. Luis Garavito. Colombian serial killer Luis Garavito, known also as the Monster of the Andes, claimed the lives of at least 138 victims, although the real victim count is believed to be as high as 300. He targeted impoverished and vulnerable male victims aged between 6 and 16 years old with the promise of money or small gifts. When the boys were lured into his trap, they were tortured, killed and mutilated. In 1997, a mass gravesite uncovered the bodies of the missing boys, and the police knew they had a serial killer on their hands. Police found a pair of glasses belonging to an adult had been dropped at the gravesite, and when they checked the prescription, this fitted with Garavito's rare eye condition. He was sentenced to 1,853 years in prison. He is kept separate from all other prisoners as it's believed he would be killed immediately.